We are calling to order the 221st, holy cow, 221 meetings, 221st Public Meeting of the Gaming Commission, June 28th at 12:30 at our offices in Boston. I think we're going straight to the issue of the Community Mitigation Fund applications. And do you have anything, Director Bedrosian?
No, I think this was just a continuation of our last meeting, so it's Mr.
Okay.
Ziemba.
All right, so Ombudsman Ziemba.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Just as a brief reminder, this is the latest in our reviews of the Community Mitigation Fund for this year's program. We began our reviews in February 10th. We did an intake of all the applications, discussed them. On March 16th, we amended the number of applications based on a filing that wasn't previously included in our summary. We met on the 14th of June to discuss primarily the workforce development pilot applications. And then we met again on June 22nd to go over the other applications under the other categories of grants. The Commission reached conclusions on a number of different grants. Included in them were the specific impact grants. I'll just very, very briefly go over the Commission's decisions to date. The Commission awarded a $150,000 award to the City of Everett that'll help provide funding for a bike sharing service in Everett that will help lessen potential construction and operational related traffic congestion. The Commission awarded a $100,000 transportation planning grant to the City of Lynn to help them remedy potential future traffic impacts on Lynn roads. The Commission awarded a $25,000 amount of funding for a study and data analysis to try to determine what impacts the Plain Ridge Park facility is having on the Norfolk District Attorney's Office, their their resources, and their caseloads. The Commission awarded $148,750,000 to provide funding for the purchase of a fire suppression vehicle serving the Plain Ridge Park facility. The Commission also awarded a reserve funding grant in the amount of $98,397.92 to provide funding for public safety related equipment serving the Plain Ridge Park facility. And then the Commission also awarded a specific impact grant to the City of Springfield in the amount of $31,523 for the continuation of the Caring Health Center and other business valet parking pilot program. So we have concluded our review of the specific impact grants, and what I recommend at a prior meeting. I went over a summary of all the transportation planning grants that were before the review committee. I recommend that we go into the transportation planning grants, then we can go into the Tribal Technical Assistance Program, and then we can go into reserves. So there are a couple of reserve applications that remain. And then if we could go into the workforce development pilot programs from our prior discussion, we had a pretty robust discussion of that, robust summary of those applications, and perhaps we could go into those. Just as by way of background, and now the Commission knows this, when the Commission decided to allow for transportation planning grants, it did so for a number of different reasons, but the traffic has been one, if not the most predominant concern of all communities related to the development of these casinos. And even though the developers of these projects have been through very substantial statewide permitting, have been through very significant host and surrounding community agreements that address transportation-related items. They've been through the Commission's review process, which was extremely robust, especially when it comes to transportation issues. But over and above that, there remain concerns relative to traffic. And again, what we've said in the past is that traffic projections are just that. They are traffic projections. And so one of the theories that we had is that because transportation projects take so long to get up and running, to do the studies, to do the planning, to do the design, and then for implementation, what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that there is a potential of a backstop. So if any of our projections are incorrect, or any of MassDOT's corrections are incorrect, and that there are more traffic impacts than expected, we will have projects that have at least passed those initial thresholds of planning, so that if we needed to institute other potential remedies to traffic situations, we could do so much more quickly. When we look at these transportation planning projects, we are not necessarily saying that the commission would fund these in any regard, but what we are saying is that we would like to allow the communities to commence with these traffic studies and plans so that we are as close to as ready as we can, and hopefully this will never occur, but in the event that our traffic projections are incorrect and more mitigation is necessary. With that as a backdrop, I've given you a summary of the transportation-related projects. I've noted that there is unanimity within the review team on almost every one of these projects, and we've noted where there was some dissent in regard to one of these projects. So with that, perhaps we could proceed with Boston would be the first transportation-related application that I've previously summarized.
Good.
As a reminder, this would be a grant that would provide funding for a portion of the city's engineering design costs for the proposed reconstruction of Sullivan Square, Rutherford Avenue. This is a major traffic corridor expected to support casino-related traffic and traffic from other traffic generators over the long term. The request is $150,000. The city of Boston has also asked for $100,000 from their reserve account for the same exact purpose, and the review team, in unanimity, recommended funding of this purpose.
This one seems clear to me that it's really necessary. They certainly convinced the review team in every category that it was worthy, and certainly I would have no problem supporting the $250,000 in funding for these planning activities.
It's clearly related, no question about that. The only question in my mind, I just was curious, I thought there was already a planning process underway, already paid for. So how does this fit into all the other planning that's been going on and is going on and so forth?
I mean, you're quite correct, Mr. Chairman. The planning process has been going on for a number of different years. It just recently, over the last year, got refreshed by the City of Boston Transportation Department. There are certain city matching costs to the cost of federal planning dollars, and what this would do is it would help defray a portion of the city's costs in the redesign.
Okay, so it's not that they don't have the money to do this particularly. It's just that we have a bucket that might be used for this and would save them using some other money.
Well, I think the way that they've expressed it in the application is that partially, if not a big component of the need to review the plans for Rutherford Ave and Sullivan Square was due to the decision regarding the Wynn Boston Harbor Casino, and they took another look at the numbers in the context of a number of other projects that have developed in the region and determined that they needed to take another look at the design. And so they felt it was very appropriate to ask the commission for a portion of the funding to help defray the city's expenses. Again, there's always limited dollars at the city level to pay for any and all transportation projects and other city priorities. And the review team felt that this was entirely appropriate that they ask for funding for this purpose.
And is there not, John, also a very substantial parallel funding provided by the Federal Highway Administration to the City of Boston that this would be part and parcel of?
Yeah, Boston indicated that they have been in conversations with the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the area to make sure that funding is available, federal funding is available for the overall construction of this project. They hope to begin construction on or about 2020, and that they believe that they have indications that they will have very significant federal dollars available for the full construction of this facility in tandem with the $25 million that we have previously required Wynn to provide for the long-term plan. Hopefully those federal dollars and the Wynn-related dollars would be sufficient to pay for the actual construction of this project once it's finalized. But as of now, they're looking to help pay for some of the design-related costs.
Yeah, I think it falls squarely on the guidelines of the transportation planning grants and the community mitigation. I think the difference is that a city like Boston and a town of Plainville are very different when it comes to how they make decisions and funding decisions. So we just need to view them accordingly. So I will be in complete support of this request.
The general criteria, a demonstration of other funds from host or surrounding community agreements, not other funds.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever, all right, I'm fine with it. All right, somebody want to move?
I'll move. I move that we approve the application of the City of Boston for a $150,000 transportation planning application for the reasons that are summarized in the review committee's memorandum to us.
Second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
And the 100,000 as well from the reserve
Oh,
planning?
I'm sorry, I thought that was both.
No, so it's 250 all told.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question. This was the transportation planning grant for 150. There's also a
Yes.
request for 100 for the use of the reserves.
Do you want us to do the reserve piece?
Yeah, it'd be great.
Okay.
Okay, I'd just amend the motion to include that we approve the drawdown of $100,000 from the current reserve account.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. The amendment approved unanimously. Everett.
Great. Just as a reminder, not to go over my previous summary, but the Everett proposal is a grant to provide funding for the preliminary design and engineering of a bus-only lane on the west side of Broadway Route 99 from the Everett City line to Route 16 Sweetser Circle. This is a primary traffic corridor for expected casino-related traffic. The grant request is in the tune of $150,000. The review team was unanimous in recommending this.
John?
Discussion, questions?
Yeah, John, just noting under MassDOT's comments, they encouraged the city to explore feasibility of an alternating peak direction bus lane. Is
Yeah.
that something Everett would be amenable to, or is there not enough money to do that piece of the evaluation and what they
So
consider?
Everett in its answer indicated that it wasn't entirely on board with that recommendation. But at the previous meeting, what I asked the commission, I would have recommended to the commission, is that if you give the authority to my office to look over a number of different conditions that we could place on some of these grants consistent with recommendations from MassDOT, we haven't had the opportunity in the process that we outlined for review of these grants to have a give and take with the communities regarding some of the MassDOT conditions and other conditions. So what it was my hope is that the commission would grant the authority to my office to work with the city, work with MassDOT to determine whether or not there the exact conditions of any sort of planning study, such as an alternative use lane. I don't believe that probably would be one of the conditions, but I wanted to leave room for further conversation between the city, MassDOT, and commission staff. Based on my prior recommendation, what I would do, I would inform the review team, or the ombudsman's office would inform the review team regarding all those conditions, and we would inform the commission regarding all of those conditions as well.
Okay. But the request is to plan a bus-only lane at certain hours, correct?
They have
Or-
certain hours bus-only lane currently under a pilot program, but this would be for a bus-only lane serving the entire day. There's a number of right-of-way considerations that limit the ability of a bus-only lane on that roadway currently. And so this would be the design and design of the bus-only
those
lane
solutions.
for the entire period.
So it's for the entire period.
Yep.
How does this interface, or does it, with the idea of going down, what is it, the Silver Line trail, and then down the commuter rail, and then back in through the MBTA land? Is that?
No,
would
you're
those-
exactly that you're exactly right in that question. So the review team asked Everett that question. So would this preclude the ability of the expansion of a lane, bus rapid transit lane, basically running along the tracks, and then potentially we could come back out onto Lower
Right.
Broadway and across the bridge into Rutherford Ave. And so with the city of Everett said that those are serving two different purposes. It's unknown, first of all, whether or not that lane would be possible, but
Right.
they're different purposes. One would connect up the existing Chelsea Silver line along the tracks and down, and then the expansion of the bus-only lane would serve multiple points coming north of Broadway from the center of Everett and others, where you could transit down on that bus-only lane south into Boston.
So if they did this, it doesn't have any negative impact on the plausibility of the other?
It does not.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
and we'd want to make sure that this doesn't have any negative consequences to the wind traffic plan
Yeah.
as well. That it's not intended that this bus-only lane take place of a wind traffic lane, for example.
Right.
That's not the intention of Everett, nor it would be something that we would find supportable.
Now, there were other considerations relative to bike lanes in Lower Broadway. Remind me where does that stand, please?
So this city of Everett did move forward with a bike lane that is, for Joe has the better terminology, but it is an elevated bike lane
Mhm.
that separates the traffic from the bike lane, and that is in the process of design.
Mhm. And it's also, it's separate from these
Yeah.
requests? Separate,
Yeah.
okay.
This would require additional right-of-way. It's a very constrained corridor, and it might be very difficult to try to find that right-of-way. But this was recommended by MassDOT. MassDOT did an Everett Transit Action Plan just recently in the last year or so, where they took a look at a number of other opportunities to increase transit connections within the city of Everett.
But as part of these sort of studies or evaluations, they will take into account that elevated bike lane or the feasibility of it and
Yeah,
how.
they'll take
how
into
it-
account existing
how it
and
jives.
planned improvements.
Yep.
So the study may very well say it's not possible, there's just not enough room?
Well, I think the study will go over the difficulties that they have, but it may try to figure out how it would actually work. But it will highlight, and I think the city is well aware of some of the obstacles in terms of,
Curb cuts.
money
Mhm.
and others that it would take to try to build such a lane.
Janice, is there anything you can do about the temperature? It feels hot to me. I don't know if it's just, and it was.
It's been a common kind of occurrence this summer in this room.
Yeah, good point. Okay, further discussion?
I'd just say that I consider the Broadway Route 99 corridor in Everett to be ground zero of the challenge for the Wynn Casino, and I was, as a member of the review team, was completely supportive of this application.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that the commission approve the 2017 Everett Transportation Planning Grant is included in the packet.
Second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Malden,
Malden.
Skip Lynn?
Lynn?
we did.
Oh, we did.
When we did Lynn with the,
Oh, that's right.
we did the
Yep.
two of them together.
We did.
The City of Malden is requesting funding for the rehabilitation of Exchange Street. Exchange Street is a corridor that will serve pretty much directly the Malden Center transportation hub of the Wynn facility. As a reminder, Wynn has a number of off-site parking requirements where it will place approximately 800 off-site parking facilities through a number of different potential places, including Wellington Circle, Malden Center, and potentially other Everett locations. And This center for both patrons and employees will be a connector to the facility. Malden Center will have direct bus connections right to the Wynn facility. And what the city of Malden is trying to do is they're trying to improve pedestrian access, safety, and revitalizing the whole Exchange Street location. And MassDOT has recommended that this would provide important benefits in regard that this is a transportation center for the Wynn facility.
And it's a transportation center because of the agreement it has with the city relative to the parking satellite, parking near Malden Center.
Yep. Oh, as part of
Station.
Wynn's initial application to us, it picked two major transportation centers, one Wellington Circle and Malden. Malden was the first surrounding community agreement that was inked with Wynn as this transportation center, where they're going to try to connect up to local transit through the Orange Line and get a lot of folks to use that. When we did the licensing process, we put a great amount of importance on mode share, where we're trying to get people outside of their single occupancy vehicles and onto other modes of transit. And that's why this Malden Center, in conjunction with Wellington, was so important.
But they also the city got a substantial amount of money for that surrounding community agreement,
Yeah,
didn't it?
there were two payments that were included. There was a transitional roads payment and a transportation hub payment. We asked Malden whether or not the purpose of those funds could be utilized or was meant for this purpose, for Exchange Street. And the transitional roads payment was very much that. It was to connect up Malden to Everett-related roads. And this is not a connector between Malden and Everett, this particular street. And the transportation hub payment was meant for a lot of sort of the redesign of the Malden Center T-stop itself. And it was, Malden states that this was not contemplated when they entered into the agreement for those upfront funds.
Mhm. And Exchange Street is, as the review team here seems to disagree on, seems to be more of a local shopping district, this portion of Exchange Street.
Yeah, I would say yes. I think we label it a little bit of a dissent, but the dissent said that it is more of a local shopping district. That is a little bit in contrast to what MassDOT has said, where MassDOT weighed the importance of it as a transportation hub. But yes, it is not a through street. It's not a two-way through street that would provide direct access to the Wynn facility, but instead it would allow improvements in that area would allow a significant number of folks who will be parking in those area facilities to transit by bike or by mostly walking back and forth to the Wynn shuttles, which are right on the opposite side of the Malden Center T.
Do you know whether this came up during the SCA negotiations?
Pursuant to the answer that was given to us by Malden, they said that this was not part of what they had anticipated
Okay.
with the use of those funds.
Because that suggests to me that this is not something that was evident as a priority, to put it mildly, and which kind of goes to the concern. Again, the first criteria here is planning grants must be clearly related to addressing transportation issues or impacts directly related to the gaming facility. It sort of feels like.
Yeah, that's why,
They
that was
didn't
my
even- they
reluctance
didn't
as well in
right.
the,
They didn't even bring it up during the surrounding
Yeah.
community agreement.
I'd be interested in Commissioner McDonald's thoughts, since he sat through all those
Yeah.
meetings and listened to all of the conversations about this one.
Well, I'm in favor of the application, but I would note that I appreciate the reservation that at least one of our members, I actually can't remember the vote, but I know there was one member of the review team who had reservations about it, and it was on account of what John has described, namely that Exchange Street is apparently a shopping street. It's not a connector, a direct connector between the transportation hub and the casino. And so it doesn't have as direct it doesn't play as direct a role in transportation to and from the casino. Nevertheless, the explanation of how they came to realize once they got further into the planning for the transportation improvements, that this street would be directly impacted by the introduction of the casino and the development of the transportation hub. And I was satisfied that, and am satisfied, that it's sufficiently proximately related to it to merit our approval.
Like in one of my other, reluctance, like other instances, I'm thinking about some of the precedent that we can create throughout this mildly directly or somewhat directly related to the casino. Granted, we are not seeing a huge demand for the monies now on this fund. That could easily change, in my view.
Will change.
That will change once the casinos come in, and there may be big nuts to kind of try to mitigate. So I'm more on the camp of being a little cautious to, mostly on both how it directly or indirectly doesn't quite fit on the context, in the context of this also starts to create a precedent, in my opinion, that as long as we're kind of close to the casino, even if it's not directly related, we might be able to be seeing more and more grants of this nature. So I'm reluctant about this.
In regard to direct or indirect, I guess I would disagree slightly with Commissioner McDonald that it is a direct transportation-related measure in that you're trying to accommodate that very significant mode share of connecting up people to transit. And so even though it is not a direct vehicular connection, it's not meant as a connector by getting in your car and driving right there. It is really meant to improve the ability of people to come, park, get out of their vehicles, get into the MBTA Orange Line, or come from the Orange Line and get into the Wind shuttles. So in that regard, I do believe it is a direct connector. I won't read Malden's response unless you'd like me to, where they've answered that direct question where we asked them, can you please explain to us how this is clearly related to transportation issues or impacts directly related to the gaming facility? I could go over that if you'd like me to, but in summary, it goes over the importance of the improvements of rehabbing Exchange Street, making it ADA compliant, making sure that the crosswalks are safe, making sure that the bike accommodation, bike racks are safe, and other streetscapes improvements. So I guess I would take some issue with it being a direct transportation impact. I think the review team found that it was, but not a direct vehicular transportation connection.
That's actually what I meant. I was not artful in the way that I expressed myself.
No worries.
But help me understand, the Malden Center station is where it's at least anticipated that the shuttles to bring employees
Yep.
will be picking people up,
And patrons.
and patrons as well.
Yep.
And they'll get there however they get there.
Correct.
And your point is that because at least some people will use that street to get to that
Yep.
to that node.
People may park there, get in the shuttles for there because
Right.
they won't be able to park in the Wind facility itself. That's prohibited for employees. That get out of their cars, walk down to the shuttle, go from there. Other folks, Malden or other places, may want to park there, get in the shuttle, take it directly to the Wind facility. And there are a number of different connections that you can make.
Could anybody then take that rationale and say anywhere anybody accesses a hub, or any station for that matter, to get to the casino as an employee or as a customer would necessitate ancillary improvements?
Well, I mean, I do think that there's a difference. Say, for example, you get in a Haymarket, you get off the Orange Line or Park Street, that it is different entirely from what is anticipated with these two transportation hubs. Wynn is expending significant dollars to do improvements, put shuttle service directly at those locations. So I think it is different than where you may access to the T up and down the line.
Well, and that gets us to the other point. If Wynn is already spending significant money to mitigate what was at the time of the surrounding community agreement envisioned to be the traffic and shuttle activity, then maybe at least conceivably some of that has been already addressed.
So Wynn's improvements pursuant to Section 61 findings are primarily for a remake of the facilities to allow for the shuttle-based parking, working with the MBTA. If you're taking a look at the Malden Center T, I believe that's all to the west of the T station. These improvements go along Exchange, which are to the east of the station. We allowed some improvements last year for the Malden Center area as well, and this would be a little bit further along the way, a little bit further. It's all within a quarter mile, but a little bit further away connected to the stop. But these type of improvements were not required of Wynn when we did our conditions.
John, have you or the group thought about if we fund a planning grant like this, for example, the next logical request, particularly when there's more money in there, is to build it. You know, if it's sufficiently proximate for us to fund to meet our standards, and we therefore fund it as a planning grant, sort of by implication, we would fund the construction too, right? Is that?
No.
How do you, why is that not sort of, how have you guys figured on the
Well,
relation?
a lot of our conversations, what we have said that internally within the commission, we've said that we would like to fund planning grants, like at the beginning of this meeting. I referenced the fact that we try to do planning grants. By no means does that mean that we fund any actual construction. One of the criteria for all of our grants is that we try to make sure that the communities are trying to engage to seek additional funding. We take a look at how they are placed on the TIP, the State Transportation Improvement Plan. They have to give us details of what they're seeking. But I think today people understand that we could not be the funding source for all of these projects. If you total them all up, we would run out of money in the first year.
Yeah, I didn't mean that we have made an implied promise to do it.
Yeah.
Just that we've crossed the threshold of, we would qualify. We may not have enough money, but by funding the planning grant, we are essentially saying this project is sufficiently a consequence of the casino that it would meet our criteria.
No,
got the money.
I think that at the point that we are taking a look at funding actual construction projects, hopefully we have a lot of competitive data about which projects would be necessary if indeed further mitigation is necessary. And we can take a look at a number of different factors about what are the most competitive projects. These ones are sort of self-identified. Of each of the communities are identifying which projects they want to proceed for planning. But at some point, the actual dollars, if you commit to an exact amount of dollars for construction dollars, you can't pay for every project.
No, I
So
understand.
undoubtedly, it'll be a competitive process, and so no matter how far along you are in the planning stage, we will have to evaluate what are the most directly connected projects. But what we've been trying to do with planning grants is to get folks down the road so that all of the data is there and so that they're ready to go once we're able to move forward.
Yeah, it's a bit of a dilemma. I know that we can certainly manage expectations today as much as possible by putting in guidelines that none of these creates a commitment in any way. But I am worried about the expectation that we create out there for a year from now or 2 years from now when they say the study that you yourself funded and you thought worth it has now come up with these priorities, and now we need money to do it. And that's where, in my view, the ripple effect or the multiplier effect, rather, of the closeness to the casino, now when we're talking about construction dollars. And I understand that there's many other sources of funding and expectations from cities and from the feds, et cetera. becomes, a big knot, in my opinion. So it's a philosophical review, right? We do need data to be able to make smart decisions, and there's a lot of work that goes into this already. Granted, there's more engineering that can really,
All these projects
All
take
these-
years.
yes. But there's also a management of expectations that I think we need to think about as we make these early decisions. That's been only my only point.
Yeah. Well, I agree, and I think we've talked about the precedent issue. We've dealt with this in the past, making a point of saying, just for the record, we are not establishing any precedents here that we will feel compelled by. This is not a judicial body with a, what do you call it, stare decisis or whatever. You know, we will be free to make our judgments in the future independent of judgments we've made in the past. So people shouldn't assume, and we want it on the record, that that's the case. Having said that, I mean, to me, this is a marginal one in the extreme, and, I don't know, I mean, I'd feel better if there were at least a little bit of data that suggested, if this was after the fact, and we were beginning to see problems in that area as a consequence, that would be an easier lift.
Well, let me talk about that, because the original, and maybe we're beyond that, but the original notion of these rounds of funding was to deal with construction-related impacts, and we've extended that a little bit because we do need some long-term planning of sorts, or some rational planning. Hence, all of these reserves and transportation planning grants. But in my view, we're still very much in the construction phase of these of the needs for mitigation. So
Well,
maybe we passed that phase
I think
already, and
we've
we're
kind
really.
of past, if you look at, just the bus lane, we just funded, the study for the bus lane, that's not construction. I think we're,
Well, but that's directly related to the casino.
well,
It's
true.
right there.
True. Anybody else, Commissioner Stebbins?
Yeah, just a quick question, John. We gave them a transportation planning grant for the Malden Center area last year. Do we know of the status of whether that's been expended?
So we asked them that question. They didn't provide any significant detail regarding how that one is going. They did provide a little bit of detail regarding the status of their economic development planner and those activities. But that Malden Center study there was a parking study, and then we had a Malden Center study relative to pedestrian and bike rider safety improvements directly in the Malden Center area. And this takes it a little bit further, as I noted, down Exchange Street.
Somebody want to make a motion?
Well, I agree this is a marginal one. I really do. I don't have a strong opinion, but I guess I'm persuaded by our two members who sat through and asked additional questions and were persuaded that this is something that is viable, and they agreed to recommend it. So, I would move that we approve the City of Malden's request for $150,000 for a transportation grant.
Second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Commissioner Zuniga opposed?
Mhm. Aye.
The other commissioners in favor. Okay, we're on to Medford.
Medford, this grant would provide a full year's worth of funding for a contract transportation planner and funding for an engineering feasibility study for a proposed new multi-use path. A new multi-use path, the South Medford Connector, may greatly enhance connections to other regional pathways and provide another method for employees and patrons to access the casino, especially if the proposed pedestrian bicycle bridge across from Assembly Square to the Wynn facility is put in place. This application, the South Medford Connector application, was strongly supported by the City of Somerville as well as a way to connect up a multi-use pathway throughout the greater region, and eventually connecting all the way through into Boston, south into Boston, through proposed pathways along Rutherford Ave and others. In regard to the contract planner, the one on that is that just recently the commission did authorize the use of their current funding into the next fiscal year. We authorized $60,000 of funding into the next fiscal year. And what this grant would be the remaining $20,000, which represents the full year's worth of funding. Last year, when we gave $60,000, it was the prorated costs of that transportation planner. This would enable them for a full year's worth of that funding. I will note just that we did in our summary page include a wrong number, so I just wanted to make note of that to you. On page 25 of your note, in Medford, we included $60,000 for the review team proposal. That actually should be $80,000 because it didn't include the $20,000 that the team recommended for the full year's worth of the transportation plan. That was just the funding for the South Medford connector.
Discussion?
So this is effectively a continuation of a prior decision, is that correct?
Yes, the multi-use path is a new proposal for this year.
Multi-use,
Multi-use pedestrian bicycle
oh,
path that would connect up basically the lower side of the Mystic to a number of the other regional connections, including eventually to Boston. And hopefully over to the wind facility through the pedestrian bridge or through other connectors
But
where they can.
you're not recommending that we do the land use planning. You're recommending against that. You're recommending.
And I'm recommending against the land use planning, which is different from the South Medford connector. The land use planning, we recommended against that in the fact that that is not transportation planning in the view of the review team, that was economic development planning. Economic development planning might have been an eligible activity under the use of the reserve, but last year Medford used their reserve for other purposes.
Yeah, but what you're doing is continuing the transportation planner that you had already committed to.
That's exactly right,
Yeah.
but the South Medford connector, which is the multi-use path, is a new proposal.
Right,
So I'm
right.
asking, you're exactly right,
Right.
what the commissioner said.
yeah, and the point maybe is a small one, but it uses existing, or available resources, in other words. It's cost effective
Yes.
in that sense.
Yes, very much so.
Because there's already somebody there.
Anybody else? Somebody have a motion? I guess it's gonna fail
So-
for lack of a motion.
No, so,
I'll move that we approve the application, City of Medford, for use of planning and grant funds in the amount of $80,000 in connection with the South Medford connector, part of their larger application, for the reasons stated in the review team's summary memorandum.
second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Okay.
The next proposal is for Revere and Saugus. Revere and Saugus have submitted a joint application for a planner that could help the two communities plan for wind-related traffic. We believe that this is, the review team believes that this is an innovative approach to regional cooperation in dealing with transportation impacts that may affect both of the communities. Although joint applications were not specified as eligible activities under our guidelines, the review team previously stated that the commission should consider this joint application. But one thing that we do recommend is that Revere and Saugus would be required to express to the commission how they would deal with the commission's requirement that 100% of reserves, $100,000 worth of reserves be used to pay for any new transportation planning grants. So in essence, this would be $100,000 that is currently on tap between the two communities and an additional $50,000 in new funds. But the two communities have not specified how they would split up the $100,000 for the reserve. We would need to go back as a condition of the grant to the two communities to see how they would split up their reserve.
And remind me how much or where do we stand with each of the community's individual reserves?
So Revere has not utilized any of its reserves. We've previously allocated $35,000 to Saugus for some of their economic development planning activities. They applied for a use of $100,000 last year, but what we said is, go ahead and do the planning, and then the remaining $65,000 was going to be for the implementation. They're currently still in the process of doing the planning on what they would do to maximize economic development potential for Saugus. Last year, we denied the use of that $65,000 reserve, but currently there's $100,000 on reserve at Revere and $65,000 unallocated for Saugus.
But if we said, or if we implied or understood that it's going to be 50-50, divided amongst the two, Saugus could conceivably say, wait, our reserve was already committed for the economic development portion.
Yeah, quite
Or
possible.
our intention was to always use that.
Yep.
And so my 50 needs to come out of a additional
Yep.
grant.
And we previously asked both of the communities to explain to us how they would deal with the reserve question. The answer that we got was non-committal about what the split would be from each of the communities. But in fairness to all the rest of the grantees, that is a requirement of our program whenever you get a transportation planning grant that use $100,000 of your reserve. And so we're
First
just
in,
asking
first
these two
out.
communities to please figure it out for us. Potentially, they could apply for a waiver to the commission at a future date, but I'm hopeful that they can figure out how to do the split, and the fact that they've been working very well together in developing this regional plan in and of itself, which could be a nice innovative model. But we didn't include that joint application in our guidelines this past year. We didn't really come to conclusions regarding some of these thorny issues of what if you can't figure out what the split would be. But hopefully communities can work together to figure that out.
Well, I like the innovative piece, the economies of scope in this case. You know, if they can share the resources to split however way. It'd be too much inside baseball, in my opinion, to try to come up or get in the middle of how to split that,
Right.
that grant
Right.
for technicalities, if you will.
Yeah.
You have applied for something but not allocated, and so on. But if that question you believe can be resolved at a later time without too much pain.
I'm hopeful. I mean, I think at a previous meeting, I referenced the fact that sometimes we put conditions on these grants that can never be met.
Yep.
But I'm certainly hopeful that the two communities that have expressed such cooperation to date
Can figure it out.
Figure it out.
Yeah, I would agree. I like the fact that they're thinking regionally and sharing resources.
Right.
And I would assume they could absolutely figure out how to continue to do that and share the reserve money.
I'm not exactly sure, sorry, Commissioner Stebbins?
I just had a quick question, John. You seem to make reference to, kind of an issue that we ran into with Medford last year in terms of making sure that this contract employee is specifically doing planning work related to casino
Yes.
impacts. Is that, it talks about a contract employee in your recommendation, condition funding upon certification that all planning costs will be casino related. So just so I'm clear, are they planning to hire somebody, or are they going to contract with a consultant to do the
They
evaluation
indicated
work?
in their response letter that they would hire a consultant.
Okay.
But they also indicated that they would be amenable to doing the certification that all expenses are related to casino-related matters.
Okay. But I mean, for everybody's ease, both these two towns and ours, is it not just more direct to say, we are hiring you for the purposes of X, as opposed to kind of doing a record-keeping exercise of what they're spending their time?
Well, we just have a number of measures to make sure that our funds are used appropriately, so we have that certification, but then we also have the actual invoices, so when they submit the invoices to us, we also have a double check that things are related to the purposes of the grant.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what is the recommendation? How much, where, from what?
150,000.
From Transportation Planning Grant?
Well, it's a new transportation planning grant of 150.
Yeah.
But under our rules that have been in place for a couple of years, we always require that $100,000 of your reserves be used for any transportation planning grants.
Of course.
And the purpose
If
of
you have any.
that is that, so that the reserves don't lie fallow
Right.
while they're seeking new dollars from us.
So if they're asking for 150,000 and between the two of them, they've got 165,000 in their reserves,
Yes.
why do they need an extra 150? I don't get that.
They wouldn't. We would just ask them to use that.
We would just use what they currently have.
So it's a reserve, this is a reserve vote, not a transportation plan.
No, it is a transportation planning grant
That takes the
activity.
reserve into account.
Okay. So it's not taking any of the transportation planning grant money, they're just using their reserve.
No,
money.
they wouldn't. That we would give them $50,000 in transportation planning grant dollars.
Okay, so this is $50,000 training grant.
No, it's technically it's a $150,000 transportation planning grant, but we take the reserve dollars and apply them towards any new funding. If you want to state it your way as well, it's almost 6, 1/2 dozen the other.
All right, so of the 106, they've asked for 150, I guess. right?
Correct.
And so we're saying you can have 150, 50 will come from transportation planning grant funds. The other 100, you've got to come up with yourselves out of your reserves.
Out of your reserves.
Okay.
Because, as you know, all reserve applications have to be approved by the commission as well.
Well, that's why I thought this was, that's what I meant, this was a reserve approval in effect.
Yeah.
or
No, but it
this
is
both. reserve
it is a
approval.
planning grant
Okay,
application.
yeah, okay.
Or another way to put it is just, I think you put it at the beginning, 50,000 of new money,
Yes.
and the expectation is that 100,000
Right,
comes from
Old money, right.
old money.
from your reserves, right.
Reserves.
But
Okay.
it's
My
both sort of
assumption-
new money, because they still require you guys to sign off on
Yes.
anything anyway, so.
Yes.
Okay, I think we got this one. Anybody else? Do I have a motion? Make it explicit.
Sure, I'll make sure,
Cover all bases.
I move that the commission approve the request, the joint request from Revere and Saugus in the amount of $150,000 from the Transportation Planning Grant for their planning efforts with the understanding that $100,000 would be first expended from the previously approved reserve to be divided as they see fit.
Was it previously approved, the reserve?
Yeah, the
Yes.
reserves.
Oh, okay. Second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Somerville.
Somerville. The review team recommends a grant to provide funds to initiate a formal planning study of the intersection of I-93, Route 28, Fells Way, McGrath Highway, and State Route 38, Mystic Avenue, which already experiences one of the highest crash rates in the state and may be impacted by casino-related traffic. A consultant team will be engaged to conduct public engagement, alternatives analysis, and concept design.
Again, how does this differ from the project, the study that's now going on? If we, the Mystic Valley Study Group, Sullivan Square Study Group, is going to eventually come up with a recommendation, somebody's going to eventually decide what to do for the long-term fix, not the near-term fix. And that long-term fix will have a whole bunch of planning money to get ready for it. How does this relate to that?
Well, not necessarily. Yeah, there are, I believe, 12 different alternatives that are being put forward.
Right.
And some of the alternatives are major improvements, such as on-ramp onto 93, rather than very specific intersection improvements. And so that this is a very specific intersection improvement. One thing, just to go back to a little bit of history, when Somerville was engaged in arbitration with Wynn, there was a number of different intersections that they were concerned about. There was also some, contentious times between the Wynn and Somerville related to 9 intersections. We asked the city why this one was of such importance. They indicated, well, they have the potential of getting state funding for this one. It is such a major generator of traffic. There's significant congestion in that area. And if indeed, as we stated when we first created the transportation planning grants, if we're wrong about some of these projections, these could have impacts in other communities, and notably, Somerville believes that if the trip distribution models or the trip generation models are wrong, that could have a very significant impact upon Somerville. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to study and design things so that if indeed we move forward with actual construction projects, that we would be at the ready now that things are designed. This is not the actual construction of it. It provides the planning study that would enable a further look on those construction dollars.
Wasn't there a air quality baseline that the city wanted to look into? Is that part of this,
That's part of the reserve.
the reserve?
I'll
We're
go
going to
over
get to
in a
that later?
second. Sure.
Okay. Then what did we fund for Somerville last year?
We didn't.
But they had a request into us for,
No. They're actively engaged in litigation with us, and they
Mhm.
submitted no application. That litigation, that MEPA litigation, has since been resolved. And, you know, part of our recommendation is we think that this is a fair and appropriate use of mitigation funds to deal with a potential significant traffic-related issue that may be experienced within about a mile from the wind facility. And if anybody is wrong regarding some of the projections, we're very much concerned about what would happen to the surrounding areas, including Somerville.
so during this must have been a point of contention during the MIPA process. Was this one intersection that the city wanted that the MIPA process did not ask?
That's exactly right. The
The-
city did, on a number of different times, raise issues related to intersections. This one was not one of the ones that was considered for mitigation. There was some language included in the Section 61 findings that mitigation cannot be expected of this licensee, for lack of a better word. I'm sort of paraphrasing, but this particular intersection has been a long-standing, difficult intersection. As I mentioned, it was one of the highest traffic crash areas in the state. And in the end of the day, mitigation was not required for this particular intersection. But that's where we're going between the difference between what mitigation is required under MIPA, what was required under a surrounding community agreement, and
Or
what
an
we're trying to do
arbitration.
for planning. In the surrounding community agreement between Wynn and Somerville, this intersection was referenced in that Wynn committed to do whatever improvements would be required under MIPA, but eventually, when it went throughout the entire MIPA process, improvements were not required at this intersection. But it was the subject of a surrounding community agreement.
Well, one of the reasons that I am strongly in favor of this application and concur with the review team's recommendation in that regard is that I've traveled personally through this intersection several times on my way to meetings out at the site of the Wynn Casino, and it's a nightmare intersection of routes. What is it? 28. It's the Fells Way McGrath Highway, the State Route 38, and which is Mystic Avenue in Somerville, and I-93 kind of going over on top. I mean, even now, it's very congested. I'm not surprised at all. It's one of the highest accident-prone intersections, and that there really is a very strong rationale, in my view, for these funds as requested.
The trouble is, that's a rationale for doing it. That's a rationale for doing it based on today's existence, which I agree are terrible. But neither MIPA nor the surrounding community negotiations, found this serious enough to do anything about as an additional factor. Not that it's not a problem; it clearly is a problem. But whether or not the problem that's being fixed is being caused by when is the question. And it's sort of the same one we just got through talking about. I think it's by definition marginal. If it weren't marginal, MEPA would have picked it up, or the surrounding community discussion would have said, hey, this is crucial. And that didn't happen. So we are adding another, circle of modestly impacted or potentially impacted areas in our actions here. I guess I think it's logical that if it's a terrible site now, it's going to be a little bit worse when wind starts, because wind's going to generate more traffic, even though it wasn't considered to be a really major problem, incremental problem. But from a planning standpoint, John, you know more about this than I do. I have this sense of sort of like there's planning here, planning there, planning everywhere. Who the hell's in charge of all this, and which plan is going to interface with which plan? But if you tell me that from a planning standpoint, this is compatible with all the bigger picture and so forth, at least from that standpoint, I'm cool with it.
Yeah, and as you know, we seek the input of MassDOT on each one of these, and they recommended that this should be considered for funding. They just recently did another road safety audit for this intersection. They've taken another couple looks at this intersection between 2016 and 2017. They recommend that this be considered for the grant. Just sort of as a personal aside, when we were thinking, or when I was thinking about trying to utilize transportation planning grants for things that may happen, but aren't necessarily projected at this current moment, this is one of the ones that I was thinking of, because if indeed everyone is wrong regarding the improvements that will occur in Sullivan Square, the argument that Somerville made in front of the arbitrators is that this could have a very, the wind facility could have a big deleterious impact upon Somerville-related traffic, both cut-throughs and off of 93, some of these major intersections. The projections, the way that they work out now, if the improvements work out as projected, and we anticipate that they will, hopefully there won't be such impacts. But in order, especially something of this this magnitude, does require very substantial time and effort and resources to try to figure out what would be necessary.
I just want to make sure I have a vision in my mind of which one this is. If you're traveling northbound on 93 and
Yeah.
you skip the Sullivan Square exit,
Yeah.
and instead go to the want to get to Route 16,
Yeah.
this would be the exit that you would take off of 93,
Yes.
where there is a convergence under 93
Yes.
of Route 38 and 28.
That's right.
28 coming from Somerville and Route 38 in
Yeah.
in and
So
around there.
if you were annoyed at any sort of issues related to
Right.
Sullivan Square, you might just
You skip
skip
it.
it,
Yep.
Go to-
continue north, eventually find your way to Revere Beach Parkway, and come in from the north down to 93,
Yes.
99.
Go over by
It takes
Ma-
you right by Legacy Place then?
Yeah.
I'm not Legacy Place.
Assembly.
Assembly Road.
Assembly Square.
Assembly Road.
Somerville is
Assembly
Yeah.
before.
Road, yeah.
Yes.
John,
Yeah, this is one of the most confusing intersections
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
I've ever seen.
John, the MassDOT recommendation also talks or asks about whether this intersection is not already part of mitigation associated with proposed 5 Middlesex Avenue project in Somerville. I'm not sure what that refers to.
So we asked the city of Somerville, please confirm that the intersection is not already part of the mitigation associated with the proposed 5 Middlesex Ave project in Somerville. And Somerville's answer says, this intersection is not currently part of any mitigation associated with the proposed 5 Middlesex Avenue project.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, do we have a motion?
Sure, I can move that the commission approve the Somerville Transportation Planning request in the amount of $150,000 for activities related to the Interstate 93, State Route 28, and State Route 38 intersection as described here in the packet.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Go ahead, John. I'm
Great.
just gonna take a break.
The next one is West Springfield, Transportation Planning Grants. This grant would provide funding for engineering design services for improvements to the Elm Street Route 20 corridor from Westfield Street to Park Street to enable the town to better accommodate casino-related traffic and to improve pedestrian, bicycle, and public transit access and safety. Route 20 is a significant contributor to project-related traffic. It's estimated that about approximately 5% of traffic will go through that corridor. We thought that it was that this was a good grant for a number of different reasons. One, because of the pedestrian and bicycle safety issues. The review team went out to the area, took a look at what improvements would be necessary. We do note that there's some significant pedestrian safety issues just within a very near circumference of this area, and unfortunately, very unfortunately, a recent fatality in the nearby area. In addition to the safety aspects along that stretch, this also could provide further important other mode connections to the facility through improved bicycle connections, which could go along a pathway along the river all the way down to MGM Springfield. I want to commend the West Springfield team. After we met with them, we didn't express that we knew about that existing pathway. I worked just about 400 feet away from there for a good number of years and never noticed it, but maybe I didn't bike very much in those days. But they indicated that that's an important corridor, and after we met with them, they had someone get on a bicycle. I keep on saying bicycle, and travel along that route. They estimated that it's about 14 minutes from West Springfield in that location all the way to the facility, directly all the way down that pathway. And so that this would be a good effort to improve other transit connections to the MGM Springfield side. I know we focused a lot on other transit connections in the eastern Mass side, but this would be an improvement in western Mass as well.
I'm sorry, did you say that you rode the route and it took you 14 minutes?
I certainly did not, but
Someone else did.
Someone else did
I
for
see.
West Springfield after we asked questions
I see.
to show how easy of a connection it would be.
I see.
And someone walked 44 minutes, I believe.
They walked it in 44 minutes.
They sent someone to walk that route as well.
This one seems clear to me. It's a really good idea to include other modes of transportation, and they demonstrated the need for it and the connection.
And I can say that this was an application, when I first read it, that I was skeptical about because of, it just, I didn't get the connection, the tangible or plausible connection to the casino traffic. But as John indicated, we did the review team, was out in Springfield and West Springfield, and we went over to this, to Elm Street. And just while we were standing there, we were able to observe the volume of traffic coming on. I think it's Route 20 from the west, which would be a major feeder, for it. And the intersection with Elm Street there was much more problematic than I had thought beforehand. And then in the course of our getting in and out of the cars and then driving over to Springfield, it was very clear to me that there really is a proximate connection between this particular part of West Springfield and anticipated traffic and connection with the casino.
Yeah, I would echo that when I first read it as well. West Springfield, to their credit, has done a lot of work on the Park Street area connections and connection to Route 20, which heads over to Westfield, which I think you're right is probably going to be a direct route from anybody coming from Westfield looking to visit MGM. But I didn't quite understand how this, in this section, has always been a problem, but with all the other construction they were having going on there, my first thought was they're chasing an available pot of money. But, you know, after hearing your report, in our conversations previously about how they did that timing out, and that this could be, you know, a convenient part of the, you know, of a access point for people to get from West Springfield over to the casino, in addition to all the vehicular traffic that comes through that pretty busy part of their commercial district. I'm convinced that this is a sound use for the money, and happy to see West Springfield, you know, stepping up to say, you know, we'll pick up whatever the balance is of the consultant costs that we need.
Do I have a motion?
I'll move that we approve the application of West Springfield for a transportation planning grant in the amount of $150,000 as explained in the report of the review team.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Okay, that's it for transportation planning. We previously have already looked at the Boston Reserve and the Plainville Reserve, so there remains the Somerville Reserve. Commissioner Zuniga, you referenced this application just a couple minutes ago. So this use of Somerville's 100,000 reserve would provide funding for baseline data collection for two areas that may be impacted by casino-related traffic: near highway air pollution and vehicular traffic patterns. The city can use such data when comparing such pollution and traffic patterns once the casino is operational. The city has been on the forefront on air pollution issues involving adjacent highways for quite some time, but some of their existing studies are a little bit out of date, and what they're trying to do is establish the baseline. By establishing these baselines, they're consistent with other grant that we have given in the past in regard to West Springfield to help establish these baselines that would enable the community really understand what impact the facilities are having. One question that may come up is that, okay, well, you're establishing this baseline, you do the studies, does that necessarily mean that you would ask for money in the future to compare what's happening in the future once when it's operational to your current baseline statistics? And I think the answer, to be honest, is quite possibly yes. There is other sources of funding that the city can pursue in addition to their own funding. They can pursue foundation funding. They can pursue state transportation dollars. I guess there is even a potential that a part of the reviews under our Section 61 findings could potentially include this intersection, even though that is not contemplated at the current moment. But if they petitioned MassDOT or others as part of their review of future studies, that is within the possibilities. But indeed, sure, at some point in the future, we may have another request, if indeed we still have transportation planning dollars, to do an assessment of what the future conditions are and how they relate to the baseline. Now, one other question that you may have is that, okay, well, how do you differentiate between wind-related traffic and all of the other growth that's in the area? And I think that's actually part of the dynamic of that future study that would be, would have to find a way to take a look at the percentage of traffic that is being generated by the wind facility in comparison to Assembly Row and a lot of the other significant projects that are ongoing in Somerville on who is the actual generator of issues. But I believe that this use of reserve is entirely consistent with previous uses, and it does establish some baseline conditions under which you can try to figure out what your impacts would be in the future. Very, very similar to what we've been doing with all of our baseline studies on problem gaming and a number of different issues.
Well, I'm worried that establishing a baseline for air quality is going to be, unlike problem gambling, it's going to be very hard to parse out and attribute, because there's a lot of factors that are going to play in, including, wind and things like that. In the end, a baseline now and a comparison later is going to be important for the city. The question still is going to remain at a future date, how much of it could be attributable to the casino, and at that time, why does that even matter anymore? Because you simply have whatever discrepancy you have in terms of air quality, and and then what's next is really unclear to me. Comparison to other baselines that are very important in my mind, and because there's ways to get to the nexus to control for other variables. Again, in the question of air pollution, I think there's just so many factors. I mean, I'm not an expert in environmental engineering, but I'm highly skeptical with the notion of what that future may look like. Today, it may be very relevant to study and put in a baseline. That may be useful at a later time. It's the look back that I find very hard to fathom.
It's the what?
The look back, once the city or,
Yeah.
we arrive at a future date, do another study, and decide that, the parts per million in the air are significantly higher, whatever that is, finding an attribution is going to be very difficult, in my opinion. But I know this is a priority for the city, and they talk a lot about environmental justice, which has a whole bunch of history and background in it. I just this is the general theme that I've been bringing up now. How does this open expectations out there in terms of funding requests in the future?
That is an interesting thought, because there'd be so much building that will continue to happen in that region. Expansions and other building, how will they determine who's responsible for what?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure
But isn't that an issue for another day?
Yeah, and that's precisely my point. My point is that we don't know what that may look like. We're not experts in that. The question will very much be one of attribution, and at that point, is that even going to matter? Because what is anybody realistically going to be able to do if it's not already the fact that there's a lot of cars and a lot of other activity, prevailing winds, the summer, the winter.
But are you just observing this for future reference, or are you saying,
No.
therefore, we shouldn't do this?
Well, I'm on the camp of therefore you shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
I'm expressing my skepticism again relative to how much expectations we begin to create on this. I'm ambivalent to some degree because I know this is very much a priority for the city, and the general notion of we're only doing planning activities and establishing baselines are good for that very purpose in and of itself. This is a different planning activity, in my view, when it comes to air pollution, because there's likely going to be many other factors. I can tell you, being from Mexico City, the biggest factor in air pollution is the winter, the inversion, the high pressure that descends on the valley, and it's the same number of cars. So I'm not joking that just the wind and the atmospheric pressure could be a big factor, or it could already be a factor in this.
Would it, going through the material, and I was surprised to learn that there is a Tufts Mobile Air Pollution Laboratory. But to answer your question, would it be interesting to get more details from the lab as to how they do these types of studies? I'm assuming they've done them elsewhere. I don't know.
I think it's very straightforward to test the pollution in the air. My point is, it's going to be very difficult to assign it to the casino or not. if this is the purpose that they're doing. I think there's a larger purpose, which is let's study it now, and let's see what is at a future date. They just happen to be available monies here, and see what else we could do relative to, to bringing some better air quality to the overall city and so on. I think it's just going to be,
I mean, I think this should actually be put in the context of what Somerville has been trying to do throughout both this process and for many years before this process, is that they're really trying to understand the impacts on their citizens from vehicles traveling up and down 93 and other nearby areas. And we're not, again, going back to the previous discussion, by us agreeing to establish a baseline, it gives them an opportunity to even do a comparison to future trends, which would give them one data point in order to then compete for any state or federal funding that is needed at the time, or to make a case before us or others that may find other further refinements in WIN's traffic plan. And so, unless you allow them to get to the base level, it becomes very difficult for them to understand the impacts to their citizens and then make a reasonable case to us or other decision makers about what might be necessary to try to remedy an impact that they believe is being experienced by their citizens with this close proximity to 93.
When I first read this application, that I kind of smiled to myself somewhat cynically, suspecting that what this really is a request for funding of a project to develop facts on which to base later claims, either against WIN or claims for further support in the nature of mitigation from us. But the more that I thought about it, I was convinced that what's wrong with that? That this is a planning, it's an application for a planning grant. It's an application for funds in order to be able to create a baseline, an objective baseline, which later positions taken by the city would be could be based upon. Commissioner Zuniga, your point. I'm certainly no expert in all of this, but I find very plausible your point that at the end of the day, whatever the data is on air pollution, it's going to be very difficult to sort out what was caused by the increased traffic going to the Wynn Casino as opposed to what we all know to be the tremendous development that's been going on in Somerville, in and around Assembly Square in particular. But as I commented a couple of minutes ago, that's a battle that, or that's an issue that would be confronted later, and it would be confronted on the basis of data that presumably would be generated by an objective process. So the way that I came down on this is that this is a reasonable. It is focused on the potential impact of the casino, but that it seeks to get support for funding an objective and scientifically based data set for the resolution of future issues.
And WIN is supportive, and they say that data could be used in future mitigation improvements.
Maybe I'm a little cynical on the support from licensees, because this is money that's already been expended. Anything that they can do to be better neighbors, they'll likely be in support. I think it's our role to try to be thinking about, how wide we're going to be casting nets for these mitigation dollars, and that's been my point all throughout.
Well, as you know, I've shared some of that concern, but I think for my money, we're sort of past that threshold. We've we've discussed it, we're on the record that there are no binding precedents being set here. We are by intent being fairly loose with our definitions here in order to try to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. I had the same, I wrote down, should we be checking the methodology here? I had some of the same suspicions and concerns, particularly given the adversarial relationship that's pre-existed here. Having said all that, it seems a perfectly reasonable thing to me to build a baseline. If we have to fight a fight about causality, we'll do that when the time is nigh. Anything else? Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the request by Somerville for the use of the $100,000 reserve fund for the purpose of transportation pollution and air, water quality data, as outlined in the report.
Second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
The motion passes 4-1 with Commissioner Zuniga dissenting. Okay, we are on to the tribal.
We're on to tribal. So I want to just be very specific about how I convey this recommendation about what it is and what it is not. What we are recommending is that the commission reserve $200,000 for potential technical assistance program relative to a potential travel facility down in the region to be conducted by Southeastern Regional Planning and Economic Development District. That we do that reserve, but as you know, pursuant to our guidelines, we've stated that such funding for technical assistance will only be made available after approval of any application by SERPED or comparable regional entity if it is determined by the commission that construction of such gaming facility will likely commence prior to or during fiscal year 2018. So what this isn't a grant of dollars to SERPED. First, what would need to occur is that the commission would have to reconvene. It would have to make a determination that it believes the construction will commence during this fiscal year. And at that time, what the review team recommends is that we go over in detail what the actual plan of technical assistance would be by SERPED for those communities before you make that approval. But we do believe that we should make that reserve of $200,000 available for this fiscal year.
And please say again, what was that proviso if who believes that the construction would start?
The commission.
The commission,
You would need
so-
to make a vote that you
Okay.
believe that construction will commence.
Okay. So a proactive vote will just, today will only,
A vote today would create a reserve.
A reserve.
It would require a future vote and full review of whatever technical assistance program we work with SERPED about.
And John, is there a trigger at some point that would unencumber that money if for some reason the tribal casino does not happen?
We didn't include anything in here, but these were anticipated to be fiscal year 18 grants.
Okay.
So,
So if by the end of FY '18, it might be revisited.
yeah, so potentially what would need to occur is that if folks wanted to do this again for next year, if nothing occurs, there could be potentially an application in the FY 19 mitigation grants, but that would be based on whatever the commission makes a determination to include in the 2018 guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just to note the obvious, that that condition has become even more important because of the recent development yesterday, in which the tribe withdrew its revised application for the Land and Trust decision from the Department of Interior, and that while they're pursuing their appeal in the First Circuit of Judge Young's decision last summer invalidating the Land and Trust decision based on so-called second category of the definition of Indians, that appeal, in my view, the merits of that appeal are very uncertain, and so that it's essential that the condition that John has described here is essential in my view, but also meets the policy objective of of having these funds available if in fact the tribe does prevail.
Yeah, I see no harm in reserving this money. It sends a signal that we do intend to, pay attention to the issues in the region if in fact it does occur, the land trust and the construction.
Further discussion? Do I have a motion?
Yes, I'll move that the commission approve the application of the Southeastern Regional Planning and Economic Development District for a planning grant, subject to the conditions that Ombudsman Ziemba has articulated.
Second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. All right, workforce development. Do we want to take a quick break, anybody, before we do that? Sure, okay. Take a quick break. All right, we are reconvening our public meeting number 221, and we're back to Ombudsman Ziemba.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. So we are now on the workforce development pilot program recommendations. A couple of weeks ago, we recommended that the Region A pilot program for the Metro North Regional Employment Board be fully funded at its $200,000 requested amount. And then in regard to Region B, we recommended that the commission consider funding both the Springfield Public Schools application and the application by Springfield Technical Community College. We recommended full funding of the STIC application of $200,000, and we recommended partial funding of $171,833.03 for the Springfield Public Schools recommendation. There is, one issue that was discussed briefly at one of the prior meetings, and I think I referenced the sentence that I said at the time that I couldn't find, but I was referencing it anyway. I've since looked back, and I still can't find that sentence. So somehow it disappeared into the ether. But the sentence that I'm describing was in relation to the Region B applications. And what we were recommending as a review team, that when we provide the grant, we have a certification that all of the funding is meant to be new funding from both of these projects. Upon review of the applications, we believe that these projects were meant to be new projects, that they wouldn't otherwise occur. But I think that the question is, how do we know that these projects wouldn't go on anyway if we weren't to provide the assistance? And so we did recommend that we require all of the applicants to certify that these are new funds that would not otherwise have occurred outside of this grant.
Is that requirement that you're suggesting for all communities or just the workforce development?
No, for the workforce development applications, and specifically when we took a look at, there are some questions regarding specifically the Springfield Public Schools application. And I think in their application, they were referencing that they could be reimbursed for some of their dollars. The question was in relation to a fiscal control section of our application, where we said, what sort of controls do you have and how would the money flow? And the city made reference to the fact that they could put the money up front and that we would then reimburse them for those dollars out of their existing resources. But that inevitably leads to a question of, okay, if they had the ability to provide the upfront dollars, could they have otherwise provided for these programs? I believe that based on everything that we heard in our interviews and what the application review is, that they anticipate that these are new dollars and new projects that wouldn't necessarily occur without us. But we thought that it would be at least important to have that further certification. I don't know if that really gets you everywhere, but it's certainly important not to tell a falsehood to us, and hopefully that goes a long way.
No, John, to pick up on that question, I don't think it disappeared too far into ether, because I remember you talking about it. Where it's been captured may not be known, but I guess, and I think it would still warrant some further conversation with Springfield Public Schools if we do in fact choose to award them this money, is that, I read their initial application. We asked for clarification on whether this was a reimbursement, and I think that led you to the suggestion of making this programmatic money new. But, thinking that, there is considerable need for this type of program in the Springfield area, understanding the limited availability of outside resources or other, pretty much otherwise we wouldn't have placed this as a potential mitigation fund resource, is having a conversation to see if in fact, there is funds that the city of Springfield, their Springfield Public Schools may be to add to their existing program that may allow us to expand the capacity of more students and seats to, again, try to address the greater problem here. So, again, it's still somewhat unclear to me, but I think your provision is strong, but as we move ahead to looking at, actually writing an official contract, it may make sense to have both of the Springfield parties come in, because I think even though they've also talked about their willingness to work together, kind of getting some ideas on how that might be possible, I think would also be to our advantage.
We also, in this application, we noted that in the future, once MGM Springfield is operational, there'll be significant new dollars that are afforded to potential workforce development programs out of the host community agreement. They have $2.5 million in annual funding for community development grants, which purpose of the grant is recognizing that workforce development requires a healthy and educated workforce. And so part of what we were hoping to achieve would be that we work with the city of Springfield to determine what workforce development resources will be available not only over the short term, over the next year, but over the long term. I'm not sure we've ever had that type of a robust discussion about how we jointly work together to see what resources would be necessary for workforce development.
Right. It's good conversation with that.
About all three of these applications, and I believe they each demonstrated that they met the criteria. I think the two Springfield, I clearly remember the conversation about less skilled employees at one program, the other a little higher skilled, higher educated. So certainly a need for both, fills kind of a different role, each program. I think all three applications have significant merit, and I, for one, certainly would agree to fund in the amounts requested all three of these.
I would second that. One of the things that our licensing team raised with me about the Metro North program, because that starts to speak specifically to casino careers, is that there's, and this is getting a little granular and more contract language, but there's some requirement that they share, and I would extend this to the other two as well, share information with us about what they're promoting for the program so that it's consistent with the long-standing issue we're having about qualifications for gaming service employees and the other key positions, making sure that inaccurate information is not going out the door.
Yeah, I expressed my support for this. The last time we spoke, that this is really a priority for Region B, as we heard when I went to the local community mitigation advisory groups. There's a real opportunity cost element to this. There's a window closing in the big ramp up to the casino. And there's activity that endures afterwards, but and I think this is clearly related and to the casino, whereas perhaps in other areas we haven't seen a big nexus, or I haven't. I think this is a worthy cause.
Yeah, I agree. The only issue, and it's water over the dam at this point, I think, is what we were talking. Is there any reference in the statute to workforce development for this fund?
No, but there's reference to, I knew you were going to ask that question. There's reference to business impacts and other impacts that should be considered by the commission, and this is a part and parcel of business impacts. Part of not only what we're concerned about is the ability of folks to compete for these MGM or WIN-related jobs, but the impacts upon the general business community because they're going to be displacing a number of different workers.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the bright line that you were trying to articulate yesterday between the Community Mitigation Fund and the Public Health Trust Fund.
Yes.
This moves from hard things like highways and bridges and stuff into softer things.
Well, one of the other delineated purposes under the Community Mitigation Fund is education, and specifically we're taking a look at educational resources. So unlike some of the other services that might be a little bit more public health related, related to programs and services that would be necessary to address problem gaming related purposes, I think that these purposes are very specifically allowable under the Community Mitigation Fund grants.
And there's also, as you mentioned before, there's a real funding that comes for the steady state as part of the host community agreement. So, but there's a period for which there's a vacuum of sorts.
Yeah.
I mean, so MGM is doing something also specific, but this is an important phase for us to think about for that big ramp up.
Now, one further recommendation that I had is, so I referenced that, potentially we would add conditions that are consistent with what we've been talking about, but specifically on the Springfield Public Schools and then the STIC applications, I think what is really necessary is that shortly, right after today, we get a meeting together or a call together between the STIC team and the Springfield Public Schools team to try to determine how they are going to dovetail with each other. And to Commissioner Stebbins' point, and then we also really need to have that longer-term conversation of how are things going to work with the city of Springfield, us, the licensee, and hitting this issue of workforce development, not only for this next year, but also over the long term. And then if Commissioner Stebbins would join us in that, I think that would be tremendous.
Well, that was the suggestion I was trying to make, but you put it a lot more eloquently than I did, or a lot more directly. Let me put it that way. No, and just to reflect, because we've talked about these at a previous meeting. I think what we're doing is probably historic for any gaming jurisdiction in the country, but I think a lot of us heard early on as we were out talking to chambers of commerce and anybody else that their biggest fear was, my best employees are going to get potentially scooped up by one of our licensees, and how do I do that backfill? And Commissioner Cameron talks about this, of giving people, other job opportunities with other employers, when clearly there's a need to make sure that people are getting some of the basic career education and learning that they need to, jump into some type of career path, even if it's not in gaming. So I think what we're doing is pretty historic, and I'm happy to see that the community colleges, Metro North Rev, really came up with some innovative solutions here to try to get at the problem. So.
I'm repeating myself somewhat here from what I said at the earlier meeting when we preliminarily looked at this, but I was particularly impressed by the Metro North application, and by the Springfield Technical Community College's application. And they're very, well-reasoned, highly articulated, and I have no qualifications with regard to them. I was less impressed with the application by the Springfield Public Schools, but less impressed from the point of view of articulation of what the objectives are and how they propose to, in greater detail, to go about achieving the objectives. But that I'm also convinced that from meeting, with them and reading the applications, that that they are focused primarily on a while related, a different class of persons in the public schools than in comparison to what the Springfield Technical Community College's application relates to. But where I come down on this is basically the last point that John just made, is that if we approve these applications, the first thing that we ought to do is to get the STIC principals together in the same room with the public school principals, and get assurance that in proceeding forward, that the services that are being provided are going to be complementary and coordinated in the sense of being expended, rationally towards the articulated objectives.
I agree with that. I think all three, as I said, all three applications are strong. The Springfield Public Schools had some holes in their application, more just information that they could have provided.
Right.
Did not make it into what they provided us. Mr. Chair, I'd move, we can take these individually, I guess. I would move that we approve the Metro North Regional Employment Board's Metro North Casino Careers Consortium workforce training application for $200,000.
Second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Mr. Chair, I'd next move that the commission approve the Springfield Technical Community College Hamden Prep Workforce Development Program for the amount of $200,000.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
And I'll make the third one, too. I move the commission approve the Springfield Public Schools application for their Ahead of the Game initiative for $171,833.03.
3 cents.
Second. Second.
Further discussion? All in
Aye.
favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
I think this is a point I've made before, but because this is the first time, I'm really looking forward to whatever data we can gather or obtain and intelligence as to the metrics and success of this program towards the end of these funding rounds. So to the extent that we can incorporate as part of those discussions, as part of our grant conditions, any kind of relevant data and quantification, it would be very helpful for us, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I was struck just thinking about this, starting way back when we first started thinking about this, we want to make sure that we really maximize the workforce benefits. And Commissioner Stebbins, I think, was the first person to bring up the backfill issue and the fact that they were going to, this is a lot of people for a small market, particularly in MGM. And over the years now, we've really, with particularly Commissioner Stebbins and Jill, we've really put together a pretty comprehensive effort to start to feed that system. We've always said we need 10,000 applicants to get the 3,000 jobs or whatever it is. And I think we should take some satisfaction in that. It's pretty unusual. And we've been working on this now hard for a few years, and it's culminating in real progress.
It was nice to see down at Plain Ridge, the number of folks that got those jobs that were unemployed or
Yeah.
underemployed.
Right. And the other comment I made before, John, but this whole project, is a lot of work. And I really appreciate you, your review team, Joe, that was a lot of work. And you really dug deep on these things and were up to speed on the issues. It was well done. Mary, thank you.
Yeah, Mary, there's a lot of information that goes back and forth in terms
Yeah.
of questions, details, answers.
Well,
I don't know that.
I'll skip the fun part of my comment, but it takes a lot to get prepared because the commission does take this very, very seriously, and we know that we are going to get all of the serious questions because we're stewards of these dollars, and they're new dollars, and whenever there's new dollars, people don't understand the nuances of what can be allowed under a statute and what could not be allowed. And so a lot goes into this, and we try to prepare for this meeting every year. And the review team was tremendous in the amount of dialogue that went back and forth about the hard questions that we asked of all of our applicants. And I just also want to commend our applicants as well, because they're getting to know this process, and that they are really actively participating throughout the year in trying to develop a program that makes sense. And they've come up with recommendations themselves that we should be very conservative in how we approach this. So I guess I commend the commission, and I'll skip the fun part. I think you probably could guess what I was probably going to say, but I'll skip that.
Wow. It's interesting, because as we're sitting here approaching July 1st, understanding that this next round almost begins to start at the end, as we move into the fall, because you start laying out the groundwork for the guidelines with the local community mitigation advisory committees and the statewide groups, so that sometime before the end of the year, they know what they can apply for. So it's not just, the application deadline timeframe and all the follow-up. It starts much, much earlier than that.
It does.
Yeah, it
Thank
sure
you.
does.
Any other business? Any other business? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, we are adjourned.